Bible and theology from the University of Montreal. But I think he's made the biggest impact on this community in his role as a Jewish educator, both a teacher, elementary school and high school, and we know him well as being involved with Solomon Schechter in administration and head of school for 33 years. So this series on prayer is drawn from a full university course that he did on Siddur and its origins and significance and relevance. And so we had to narrow it down to 4 classes and choose things that we thought were the most relevant was challenging. So Shimshon has a lot to share with us, and please give him the floor.
Thank you. It's wonderful to come home, teach at home. I guess I used to sing my teachings, but now I'm going to speak it. I want to begin with a qualifier before I begin. And that is that I'm not wearing my kippah as a rabbi, and therefore I'm not taking any halachic positions. There's room in the front, and it's so strange to see people behind the racks. I'm not taking any halachic positions, and I'm certainly not giving any halachic rulings. And if at any point it sounds like I did, it was a slip of the tongue. You all have your synagogue rabbis, and those are the ones who will make decisions for you. I'm not doing anything like that. I'm not going to sit here and sing and teach prayer. I will be speaking about the history of prayer, the structure of prayer, the origins of prayer, and whatever you ask me that will force me to digress about what I had planned to speak about prayer. So first, let me drop some names. The foremost authority in North America on prayer is a man by the name of Lawrence Hoffman. He grew up in Kitchener, Ontario. And when he became bar mitzvah, they started bugging him to come to shul because they needed a minyan. So how does a man from Kitchener, Ontario become the foremost authority on prayer in North America? So he explained that nobody objected to interrupting his games to call him to shul. But once he got to shul, the only objective that they had was, how fast can we finish? So he said, I wanted to know, what is this activity the Jews do that is so important that a kid has to give up his games after school, but the only importance is how soon you got through. And that's what he did. He began to study prayer. He loves to lecture in Canada because whenever he's introduced, he says, this is the only place where they know where I'm from when I say that I'm from Kitchener, Ontario. So Lawrence Hoffman, he is a Reform rabbi. He published at least a dozen books. Some of them are on the High Holidays, High Holiday Liturgy. He published one on Al Chet. He published one on Avinu Malkeinu. He published one on Kol Nidre. It's called All Vows. It is wonderful reading, but I emphasize that he's a Reform rabbi, and not all his positions are fair play for somebody that doesn't know what he sold you. So if you do go there, fine. A Romanian Jew by the name of Ezra Fleischer left Romania, made Aliyah. He became the authority in the world. He passed away a couple of years ago. And his students, a young lady whose name is Shulamit Elitzur, is probably the most knowledgeable woman in the world about Jewish prayer today. It's really an amazing piece of work. An amazing piece of work, Jewish prayer. We could ask lots of questions, and we could also kibbutz. So I had a very religious uncle who wore a black hat and a black coat, and he woke up in the morning and he said, "Dear God, you know what I want, I know what you want, amen." That's one form of prayer. Then Well, he wanted also to finish early. Then there is a story about a gentleman who would go to shul every day, but his kid didn't believe in it. He just didn't talk to them. But out of respect for their father, the eldest son every morning got up at 6:30 to bring his father to shul at 7 and come back to shul to pick him up at whenever davening finished. And then he's told his dad one day, I have a meeting downtown. Please make sure not to linger, because I must pick you up right after so I could get to my meeting on time. Sure enough, his father came out late and late and late, and he told him, tell me, do you think God is really listening to you? You're talking to God? And his father says, me talking to God? I come to shul to talk to Moshe. He thinks he's talking to God. Hence the title. Who do you talk to when you pray? Do you talk to God? Do you talk to your neighbor? Or do you talk to yourself? And by the time I finish, I hope you will realize that it wasn't just a catchphrase that I used, but there was actually meaning behind all of those. So thus far, the kind of funnies and the jokes, etc. So who do you pray to? We have his bestseller, constantly being reprinted, right? It was created, nobody knows when. So I'll tell you that the first prayer book was written in 865, and the second prayer book was written about 50 years later by a Sephardi rabbi who didn't like. He said, Ashkenazi prayer, no mysticism, no spirituality, this is not Jewish, it's too straightforward. And the second one didn't work because it was written in Arabic or Judeo-Arabic. So the first one survived, even though the second one was the better one. For those of you who are young enough to remember, there was Beta and there was VHS, right? And Beta was better, but VHS made it. This is exactly that. And the main prayer in here, you could have a debate. Which is the main prayer in here? The Shema? The Amida? Sephardi Jews call it the Amida. Ashkenazi Jews call it Shmona Esrei. But they're really not Shmona Esrei. They're not 18, but there are 19 brachot. But there, most of the time, there are not Shmona Esrei, because on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there are different numbers. So the Sephardi term, Amidah, the prayer that you say while you stand, is the correct term. Why was it made up? When was it made up? Where was it made up? I'm going to give you some names, important names that nobody talks about, but they are the minds that created this document almost entirely. There are a couple of exceptions. I'll go through them with you and I'll tell you a couple of dramatic stories. And the first one goes as follows. In 1897, some of you may know that date, because that's the date that Theodor Herzl was holding his Zionist Congress in Basel. Two people came into Britain and went to the antiquities market. And they brought a scroll, a piece of parchment that's rolled up. And that scroll had some Hebrew writing in it. So the antiquities dealer who was going to buy it brought it to Cambridge University, and, is this real? Is it fake? What is this? He looked at it and he discovered that this was the original Hebrew scroll of a book that no longer existed. It was called Ben Sira. Who is Ben Sira? So I have to give you a little bit of background. When the Bible finished, when the canon was closed, when there was no more Jewish prophecy, It's called, in technical language, that the canon was closed. No prophecy, and nobody could add more books into the Bible. There is a theological debate. If the Bible is closed, then everything that came after the Bible is not sacred literature. But that creates a problem. Because if the Bible is closed and later literature is not sacred, then the New Testament is not sacred, is not prophetic. So, the literature that comes between the closing of the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament to Jews is nothing. To Christians, it became very important literature because it was the transition to the New Testament. The more sacred that literature was to Christianity, the more Jews pushed it away. We successfully pushed it so far that none of the books survived in Hebrew except in Greek translation. So in 1897, when a book that no longer exists comes on the market in Hebrew, it's a major find. So a gentleman in Europe from Cambridge University doesn't get into the next 747 and an hour later lands somewhere, or 5 hours later, but he gets onto a boat. And he ends up somewhere 2 or 3 weeks later. And he ended up in a town called Fostad. Anybody know what that is? No. Fostad is the old name for, Fostad is the name for ancient Cairo. What was in Cairo? That's where this document came from. So the Cambridge scholar thought that he discovered who knows what. And he goes to this place in Fostad, and they take him to where it was found. And it was found 1 floor above the attic of the synagogue called the Ben Ezra Synagogue in Cairo. And that gave birth to the Geniza, the ancient documents that existed. Hi, nice to see you. Thank you for coming. That gave birth to a treasure trove. Now today, when you take somebody else's possession, you're called a thief. But if you were a museum or a university archives, you could take the possessions of another country and legally bring it to your museum. So at that time, the gentleman who went to Cairo, whose name was Solomon Schechter, brought with him 200,000 documents from the Jewish garbage can in Cairo. And he brought it. And everything that we know about prayer comes from these ancient manuscripts that provide research to people. So the Geniza that transferred from Cairo to Cambridge is called the Schechter-Taylor Geniza. Who was Taylor? Taylor was the benefactor. He was the one who paid the bills. Solomon Schechter was the scholar in residence, if you will. Okay, so that was one of the important treasure troves from which we know all about prayer from 1,000 and 2,000 years earlier. And the person who found it at the time was Solomon Schechter, and there are people who sit there today with magnifying glasses or with computer scanners to do comparisons. And there is a professor, Uri Ehrlich, in Beersheba, who just published a book with 800 documents from the Geniza, comparing the Shmona Esrei, or the Amida, of one to the other. What's the one and what's the other? The Israeli version of the Amida and the Babylonian version of the Amida. That's a future lecture or the discussion that we're going to talk about. So, in the way of introduction, this is where it comes from. One more story, and then I'll get into the analysis of the text. In the year 860, No. I think I will do a little bit of history first. You don't have this slide. Okay? I'm just giving you a quick overview of Jewish history. Minus 2000 is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Minus 1000 is King David and King Solomon. Minus 586, the first temple is destroyed by the Babylonians. Who built it? Solomon. Very good. Just wanted to see if you're... Okay. 70 years later, in 586, the prophet Jeremiah, this is germane to our discussion, the prophet Jeremiah runs around the streets of Jerusalem. In 70 years, the temple will be destroyed, but now, will be rebuilt, but now the temple is going to be destroyed. First temple. The second temple, nobody said anything about it being rebuilt. So the second temple was a devastating blow. We'll come to that in a minute. So Ezra and Nehemiah, I should tell you that King Cyrus of Persia has this dream that God has chosen him to rebuild the temple, and he asks Ezra and Nehemiah to make aliyah and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And guess what, folks? Babylonia at the time was as good as New York and Montreal today. And nobody was going. They weren't making aliyah. The king sent, he sent money, he sent people, but the Jews continued to live in Babylon. 165, the period of the Maccabees. 0 is attributed to be the beginnings of Christianity. The second temple is destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. Jewish literature is being put down in writing. What people learned in the yeshivas, if you remember, grandparents, great-grandparents, that used to say hundreds of Mishnayos, hundreds of pages of Talmud by heart. After the destruction, there was fear that it won't be remembered, and Rabbi Judah the Prince writes down the Mishnah, and in 500, they write down the Babylonian Talmud. In between here, the Romans kind of liked the idea of one God, but it was too complex for them, so Constantine, in the year 360, adopts Christianity as the official Roman religion, Islam, and then we come to the person that I'm talking about now. So I came to this all because of one person. Like today, people send money to Israel. Yeshivas, not to Israel, to Babylonia. To the yeshivas, and there was a yeshiva in Sura and Pumbedita, and the person who was responsible for the yeshiva was a gentleman whose name is Rav Amram Gaon. In those days, the head of the yeshiva was not called the rabbi, or Rebbe, or Tana, or Amora. They were called the Gaonim. And Rabbi Amram Gaon receives a letter from Spain. You know, we send you so much money, what are you doing for us? Everybody davens whatever they want to daven, they read whatever they want to read. Maybe you could write a prayer book so that there should be a unity in the community. And that's a word that I'm going to use over and over. Probably that's the thrust of tonight's presentation. That we should pray the same thing. That there shouldn't be a Kiddush club and a Hashkama minyan and a this minyan and a that minyan and a Sephardi minyan and a Ashkenazi minyan. That we should daven the same thing. And I will bring you at the end, in very fine print that's hard for the faint of eyes to read, at the end of this document, the exchange of the letters from the president of the Jewish community in Spain to Rav Amram Gaon, and his response. And let me tell you, Combined Jewish Appeal could take lessons in fundraising and how to speak to a donor. You will read it. I actually gave it to you in both Hebrew and English, so that, you know, if the president of the shul wants to do some fundraising, he should learn some lessons. 50 years later, Rav Saadia Gaon doesn't like the prayer book. As I said, it's too bland, it's not mystical, it's not spiritual. He writes his own in Judeo-Arabic, and Arabic, and it doesn't stick. Because as Jews moved out of the neighborhoods, they didn't speak Arabic anymore, and his prayer book didn't last. Rashi in the Crusades and the birth of Israel now. The davening is made up of 3 sections. There are 3 important sections. In nice English, it's called rubrics, if you will, building blocks. The first one is the Shema and its blessings. The second one is when I say Shema and its blessings, there are 2 blessings before the Shema and 1 after in the morning, 2 before and 2 after at night. Yotzer HaMeorot, HaBocher Ve'amo Yisrael Be'ahava, and Baruch Atah Ga'al Yisrael are the blessings before and after the Shema. The Amida, which we'll talk about today and the next session. And finally, the Torah reading. So that's technical. Now let me give you the flip side of this. The Shema, who's God? Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem. So the Shema is a declaration of the belief of the... a declaration of a belief in the unity of God. If I were a Christian Baptist minister, I would get up and I would say, I believe. But that's the statement. I believe. That's what the Shema is all about. And I'm not going to have the time to go into the details, but for those who know. Yotzer or uvore choshen. That is not a quote of the prophet Isaiah. The quote from Isaiah was, Yotzer or uvore ra. Ra. The Persians, the Zoroastrians believed that it can't be that a good God should also create evil. So they believed that there were 2 gods, the gods of good and the God of evil. So when we declare in the preparation for the Shema, the God who created light and who created evil, the rabbis didn't want to put that into our prayer book. Every day I should declare before the Shema that God creates evil, and that's the God I'm praying to. So the statement was changed. The gods who created light and created darkness. Yotzer or uvore choshech, and it's a statement that what? There aren't 2 different gods, there is one God. So, the Shema, who is God? The Amida, most Jews believe that the Amida is an outpouring of the heart of a list of requests, right? A list of requests to God. And we will study next week about when it is said and when it's not said. So if the Amida, what are we wanting from God? We want wisdom, we want sustenance, we want success, we want the return of fair play and justice, we want to return to Zion, we want peace, we want Mashiach now, we want. Amida, what do we want? Third part of the prayer is the Torah reading. So if this is what we want from God, then the Torah reading is a statement of what God wants from us. So there are 3 pieces to the entire services. Three pieces, and they have a little addendum. And you all know the addendum. The morning prayer begins with? Which one? I heard something. Birkot HaShachar, the morning blessings. A list of blessings, and that's called Birkot HaShachar that we say every day. So that's one section. So that's another rubric that was added subsequently. It's a prayer, it's a segment that used to be said at home almost as you get dressed, as you get out of bed, as you open your eyes, etc. Bless God who gave me X. Bless God who enabled me to open his eyes. My eyes. Bless God who made me free. And then there is the controversial one, bless God who did not. So there are three who did not. So that's one building block. The second building block, if you know the name, it begins with Baruch She'amar, it concludes with Yishtabach, and it has a series of hallelujahs in the middle, and it's called Zukei de Zimra. Verses of praise, basically quotes from the book of Psalms. So one is Birkot HaShachar, blessings. Second is Zukei de Zimra. The three building blocks, and then there's one at the end, which is Aleinu. Aleinu, the Psalm, Uval Tzion, the conclusion of the service. Those are the building I will not cover. Now the Talmud is asking the same question that I began with. Where does this come from? Who made it up? Okay, the Talmud does not find an easy answer. And it attempts all sorts of explanations to where did this come. To the Talmud, prayer means only one prayer. When the Talmud says tefillah or hatfilah, it means the Amida or Shmon Esrei. In other words, the word service that we use, Shachri, Mincha, Marev, Ne'ilah, that does not exist in the Talmud. When the Talmud says tefillah, it means Shmon Esrei or Amida. So there are quotes in the Talmud. One set of discussion says that the prophets made up the Amida, or the prophets made up the prayer. Another quote is that the men of the great assembly, Nevi'im v'Anshei Knesset HaGdolah tiknu. The Amida was made up by either the prophets or the elders of the assembly. There's a problem with that. That was a very long time ago. And for 3,000 years it was kept secret. Nobody ever quoted a line from the prayers. Nobody discussed any of it. How could it be? It goes even further. Another opinion, and for those of you who studied the tractate Brachot, know that our forefathers composed the prayer. Now that is basically an attempt to put the notion of words into the mouths of our forefathers. How could a rabbi sitting in front of his Talmudic academy say, Abraham didn't pray? Abraham didn't pray? Of course he prayed. I'll show you where. It says, Vayashkem Avraham baboker, last week Sedra. Vayashkem Avraham baboker, when Abraham got up in the morning to take Isaac on the sacrifice, the word got up in the morning surely means that he got up to, there was no CNN, there was nothing else to do, so he must have gotten up to pray. Isaac goes wandering in the fields and his bashert is coming. Rebecca is being brought by Abraham's servant. Most people say Eliezer. It's not true. The word Eliezer is never but once mentioned as Abraham's servant. The person who brought Rebecca to Isaac was Abraham's servant. The word Eliezer never appears in that text. You say it 100 times and you don't realize it, but now you'll check when you get home. So Isaac goes out to meet his future wife. And we're told, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lifnot arev. Isaac went out to whatever he was doing in the field in the evening, and the Talmud says, oh, lasuach can come from the word siach, which means bushes, thank you, bushes, and it could also mean sicha, conversation. Isaac must have gone, what? Rebecca, what? He went out to converse with God. Why else would Isaac go wandering around in the fields in the middle of the day? So we have a basis for Abraham prayer, Isaac prayer in the afternoon. When Jacob goes running away from his brother Esau, right, he has a dream. And he sees angels going up and down on the ladder. Right? So that one, he went to sleep. So we know it was evening. So Jacob must have created the evening prayer. That's what the Talmud says. And the educator in me says the following. For those who read Hebrew, Avraham, the bet, is the word for Boker, Shachrit. And Yitzchak is Tzohorayim, Mincha. And Yaakov is Erev. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob each made their prayer. So says the Talmud in the tractate Brachot.
What is Musaf?
What is Musaf? So therefore, the prayers were composed. Did you look ahead? Yes. The prayers were composed to correspond to the temple sacrifices, says the Talmud in Brachot. They were not the forefathers. They were not accidents of history. The prayers, the Amidas, the services were composed, what's the word? To correspond to the prayers. So that means that there was a Shachrit sacrifice, we have a Shachrit service. There was a Musaf sacrifice, we have a Musaf service. And there was a Mincha sacrifice. There's a problem. What happens with Ma'ariv? There was no evening sacrifice. The Talmud tells us that in Dung Gate, Shar HaShpot in Jerusalem, not a safe place to be in today, but when through Dung Gate, they took out the garbage from the temple from the entire day of sacrifices. So we learn from there, remember what I said, I do not take halachic positions. So we learn from there that there was no evening sacrifice to correspond to the Ma'ariv service. Therefore, the Ma'ariv service is not obligatory. It's voluntary. Before you celebrate, it is voluntary, and so it was 2,000 years ago. However, minhag shepashat b'chol Israel, a custom that has been spread across all of Israel, has now become obligatory like the other services. So who asked me about the services? So here are the next piece. So the Talmud cannot come to grips. Where does this come from? Where does this come from? Is it from the prophets and the Great Assembly? Is it made up by the forefathers? Or is it made up to correspond to the sacrifices that used to be in the temple? By the way, the only one that makes sense is why? So here is the shocker for most of you. Folks, it's a great surprise for Jews to hear that prayer is only 2,000 years old. It is not 4,000 years old. And for 2,000 years, Jews didn't pray. Shock. Jews didn't pray. What did they do instead? Sacrifices. And guess what? Any Kohanim in the room? Guys, when somebody had it in his heart to repent or to bring thanksgiving or whatever he brought a sacrifice for, he brought it to the temple, he handed it over to the Kohen, and that was the last thing he had to do with the sacrifice. There was no prayer associated with the sacrifice. There was no such thing as organized Jewish prayer. And the Talmud is trying to struggle. Remember at the beginning, what did I say? When was the Talmud created? 500. The Mishnah was created in 200. But when was the temple destroyed? 70. What happened after the temple was destroyed? There was a major event, a major catastrophe in Jewish history for the Jewish people. How are we going to do what the temple did? The ritual is one piece. Far more important than the ritual is the Jewish community. The Velcro that kept the Jewish world together. And the rabbi who was responsible for the Jewish court, place yourself in his shoes. The temple has just been destroyed. So let's say that we're somewhere between the year 75 and 100. You are the head of the Jewish court. What would you do? The physical, spiritual, political future of the Jewish people rests on your shoulders. What would you do? I'm challenging you. It's not a rhetorical question.
Use Google Accelerate there.
We have a major problem.
You call Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai.
Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the head of the court when the temple was destroyed, and he did nothing. Powerful statement I just made. Okay, it's so wonderful not to be a rabbi of a synagogue. You can say whatever you want. You don't need to take responsibility for anything. Okay, so let's go back. So comes along Rabban Gamliel, correctly pronounced Gamaliel, from the word camel. Gamaliel, it's irrelevant. The same rabbi whom you speak about at your Seder table, the same rabbi. And he makes some wild statements. Okay. If anybody would like to see it in English, I can't keep two slides on the board at the same time. So look at your next slide and you'll see the English, if you prefer that. Or, let's do it like this. Okay, Rabban Gamliel says, head of the court, temple was just destroyed. Correct? Every day a man should say the 18 benedictions. Rabban Gamliel omer, b'chol yom yitpalel adam shmona esrei. You know Jews. Never goes with one opinion. Rabbi Yeshua answers, and abbreviate Shmona Esrei is good enough for me. It's too long for the whole Shmona Esrei. Rabbi Yeshua omer, me'ein Shmona Esrei. Rabbi Akiva says, guys, it's not nice in the Talmudic Academy to argue. Can't you find the middle of the road? Let's find a common position, as negotiators would say. So he says the following: if he knows how to daven fluently, he should say the entire Amida. And if he doesn't know how to daven so well, an abridged Amida is good enough to break his teeth. Rabbi Akiva omer, im shgura tfilato b'fiv yitpalel shmona esrei, ve'im lav me'ein shmona esrei. Comes along the third opinion. You don't want to argue? I'm sorry, we have a fundamental difference. Says Rabbi Eliezer, if a man makes his prayers fixed, if you just rattle off the same thing every time you say blah, 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 amen, blah, 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 hallelujah, then his prayer is not genuine. It's not a real supplication. That's not davening. That's reading. Rabbi Eliezer omer, ha'oseh tfilato keva, ein tfilato tachanun. If you say the same thing, and the only objective you have is like Rabbi Dr. Hoffman, what time did you get through? Cantor Nathan Mendelssohn of the Shara Shomayim, Alav Shalom, used to study with me when I learned with Rabbi Hirschbrun to be ordained. He was the Chazan of the Shar Shemaim, and I studied with Rabbi Hirschbaum on Sunday. In the middle of the week, I rehearsed with Cantor Mendelssohn twice a week. So he was a Chazan, I was a Chazan. So what do you talk about? Not Rabbi Hirschbaum, you talk about Chazanut. And Cantor Mendelssohn says, Shimshon, don't worry about the davening. It's a marathon. The only question they ask is, what time did you get through? If you daven the same thing every time, your davening is no davening. What does Rabban Gamliel do for us? He died in 135. He died in 135. What happened in 135? I didn't include it in the list. Anybody? Bar Kochba. So in other words, Jews did not yet accept that the temple is forever gone. Even though there was no prophet like Jeremiah saying, guys, in 70 years, it'll be back, not so bad. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer says, fixed prayer is not prayer. Analysis. So what are we saying here? Rabban Gamliel establishes that 18 brachot are obligatory. I'm not dealing with 1819 today. Okay, I can't do everything in one day because then I'll be unemployed for the next sessions. Rabban Gamliel establishes that 18 brachot are obligatory. Bam. The temple is the temple was just destroyed. Rabban Gamliel takes a responsibility. He takes our Shmona Esrei and he makes that the piece that's going to hold Jews together. Please.
How come 18? Why not 13 or 558?
Very good.
Why 18?
The Talmud asks the same question. We have a Mizmor David and it has 18 times the name of God in it. That's not the reason. That's an attribution, that's a link. We don't know why 18. But the Talmud asks the same question that you're asking. Okay? So you could also become a Talmudist. Okay, so Rabban Gamliel establishes there should be 18 brachot. But if the temple was just destroyed, what would you expect to be the content of those 18 brachot? Help me out.
Rebuild the temple.
Rebuild the temple. What else?
Free us.
Requests, personal requests.
Personal requests have nothing to do with the temple. That's the point I want to make. We say, Shlach lanu, right? Tshuva, ala tzadikim. We say all sorts of things, but what's missing? There is an oblique reference to the temple with V'techazena einenu b'shuvcha l'tzion berachamim. And there is one other thing that's missing that is hardly mentioned. If Rabban Gamliel was looking for the reestablishment of the temple, for the reestablishment of the cult, I would have expected the Kohanim, the priests, to make up a central element in the Amidah. And it's mentioned in the last bracha. Ve'asem lecha shalom, gave birth to Sim Shalom. So the entire priestly benediction is almost like a postscript to the Amidah. So it's somehow something is missing. Did he have something else in mind? And not the recreation of the temple, and not the recreation of the ritual, and not the centrality of the Kohanim?
That's a good question.
He wasn't here and I wasn't there. However, so Rabban Gamliel establishes 18 brachot are obligatory, agrees with him, however, he prefers a shorter version. He could have lived in 2015. Rabbi Akiva tries to find a compromise, and Rabbi Eliezer I already said enough about. Okay? Why did Rabban Gamliel prevail? Because he was the head of the court. And some people say that he was quite despotic in his behavior. But the fact is, what he did is still functioning in 2015. He established the Amida as the central element of the Jewish Velcro that holds the community together. I'd like to do with you another piece of Talmud, if you permit me. I have about 12 minutes left or so. Fashionable over time, not too much. Okay. Rabban Gamliel is still at it. He continues. And he says the following. Rabban Gamliel says that the reader, the cantor, absolves the public from their obligation to prayer. Motziet harabim yedei chovatam. He absolves the public. What does that mean? If I'm making Kiddush and you're hearing and you're saying Amen, you don't have to make Kiddush. You don't have to say Borei Pri Hagafen. You heard me say Hamotzi? You don't have to say Hamotzi. I said Amen and you're absolved. And if I'm the cantor of the congregation, then when Amiel is davening, there has to be silence. Because otherwise you can't absolve yourself from his prayer. You could only absolve yourself from his prayer if you hear his prayer.
Thanks.
Okay? Now, however, Chachamim say something else. The sages have a different attitude. The sages say that everyone must daven by himself. Everyone has to absolve himself. It's not sufficient that, you know, you do your thing, I do my thing. I could talk about the political news of the week. I could make some stock market deals, nicht auf Shabbos gerät. So I could do, no. Everybody has to daven. So there are fundamental differences here of what it means for Jews to pray. Does he pray for all of us as a community and we form in a community? Remember who I'm talking about. I already made a statement from one of the previous Talmudic passage. Amar lahen, Rabban Gamliel says to the sages, Im ken lama moridim oto lifnei hateva. If you believe that everybody has to daven for himself, says Rabban Gamliel, what do we need a cantor for? If everybody has to daven for himself, if everybody has to read the prayer, we don't need a leader to lead us. Right? Everybody, why assign a leader? The debate continues. The sages say to Rabban Gamliel to absolve those in the congregation who don't know how to read. So we only need a congregation and a chazan for a shul that's made up of people who don't know Hebrew. No. Right? But that's what comes out. The sages respond to Rabban Gamliel. If you maintain that the leader absolves everyone, why does everyone still need to pray? It's so logical, it like flows. The beauty of Talmud. Said Rabban Gamliel to the sages to allow the leader to prepare, compose his prayers. What does that mean? In those days, not everybody had an art scroll in his hand, not a Koran and not a Birnbaum. So the cantor had to memorize, he had to create. So according to him, right, the cantor's job is, we recite a silent Amida to allow the cantor to compose what he is going to say. Much nicer than to say, we only have a cantor because of the dummies who don't know how to read. Said Rabban Gamliel to the sages, if everyone absolves himself, why assign a leader? They already recited the prayer and are already absolved. Said the sages to Rabban Gamliel, we still need a reader to absolve those who don't know how to read and cannot absolve themselves. Fine. Said Rabban Gamliel to the sages, just like the leader absolves those who don't know how to read, let him absolve everybody. So nobody has to daven, just the cantor. Now you know why cantors get salary. Because we don't have to daven, he does. Summary. The sages. According to the sages, everyone must pray individually even when participating in public prayer. Everyone must pray individually even if they participate in public prayer, and the only purpose for the public prayer and the Chazan's repetition is to absolve those who can't read. Rabban Gamliel's position, according to Rabban Gamliel, the essence of prayer is a community praying activity. There is really no reason for private prayer when praying with the community except to allow the Chazan to compose his thoughts and be able to do it. Folks, this is the essence of Jewish prayer. Community building, being a community in front of God on Kol Nidrei night. What do we say? Anu matirin lehitpalel im avaryanim. We allow everybody to pray together, including those who have sinned. Why? Because when we pray as a community, God has no choice but respond positively to our prayers. In Hineni, what does the Chazan say? I may not be worthy, but because I beseech you on behalf of the community, you must accept our prayers. Rabban Gamliel was aware of the original intention of the tefillah because he lived when he made up the, what did he make up? The Shmona Esrei. So he knew what the intent was, better than the Chachamim knew. Rabban Gamliel knew the value of community. Rabban Gamliel is not speaking of the return of the priests. He is not speaking about the return of the ritual. Rabban Gamliel is speaking of one thing. By the way, again I caution you, where should you daven? You would think intuitively, you have to go to the small shul, maybe there's no minyan, maybe maybe they need you, maybe. What is the halacha? Berov am hadrat melech. You have to daven where there are more people, because when there is a community, then that's what prayer is all about. The sages seem to have gone away from that intent and emphasize personal prayer. Do you see the sword match between Rabban Gamliel and the sages? Not you say this and I say this. There is a totally different philosophy. Is prayer something private between me and God? Is prayer a communal activity? Rabban Gamliel took his position. I said at the beginning about the guy who says to his father, you think you're talking to God? At the end of the day, what we have here is the Hebrew word to pray is lehitpalel. In the Hebrew grammar, that's a reflexive verb. Reflexive, comme on dit en français, se laver, se habiller, something that you do unto yourself. Lehitpalel is to converse with yourself. It's a reflection between you and yourself. What did I do? Did I do well enough? Could I have done better? Prayer is a communal activity that allows us to be self-reflective, and women probably will know this better than men. When my mother, may she rest in peace, lit Shabbos candles, every one of us made it behind those closed hands and those closed eyes. I don't want to tell you how many times I was the central figure in those prayers for perhaps not the best reasons. But the fact is, women know that. And men are trying to find it, and there is a Gemara in Chagiga, page 14, Daf Yudalit, where Arba Nichnasu Pardes, where the sages go into the Pardes, and one of them wraps himself in the talit. And the talit was not the tzitzit, it was a shawl in which to contain himself when he davened. So we have our own moments for men, we have our own moments for women, but the temple is gone. What will preserve community? Rabbi Gamliel answered. Community, assembly, the goal of that assembly is prayer. We come together to express the need of the community. What those needs are, we will study in future sessions. Questions? Don't miss what I said. You have to daven with the community, not in pockets. Are there any questions? Yes, please.
I asked, you covered the root of tefillah and the root of the word sacrifice.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, just the root of the word sacrifice and the root.
The root of the word sacrifice is korban, from the word karov, as something that brings you close to God. Because you would come to the temple, you would come in proximity to some degree. The priest really is the one who brought it to the temple. Yes?
Individual prayer and community prayer, though, the way I see it, maybe isn't mutually exclusive. How can you figure yourself as part of the community if you can't, like when you take your individuality in prayer, shouldn't you sort of be on that level before you reach the communal level?
I'm not sure I'm answering the question that you're asking. I'll say the following. Prayer is a communal activity, and you are right. Community prayer and personal prayer are not exclusive, and there are places in the prayer, and the Gemara discusses them. Where do you insert your personal prayer? Do you insert it where the Amida switches from plural to singular, Elohai Netzor, my God? Or do you insert it where it's relevant to the topic being discussed at each bracha? I only wish that every person who listens to you pray has only that problem and really are concentrating on their davening, deciding where to put in their personal prayer. Next week, same time, same station. I'll be Shema and Amida. Thank you for coming.